Welcome back to Missing. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. Big part of my mood here is that we are embarking on something very exciting. We're very excited about it, and we think our listeners are going to love it. I hope everyone out there is doing well. Tim, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Lance. Thanks a lot for asking. And yes, so this episode, this conversation with Matt Murphy, this episode aired on Crawlspace, our other podcast, just a couple of weeks ago. But we're going to air it here on Missing as well, and we're going to add some new final thoughts to it at the end, so you want to stick around for the last segment. And we also want to let you know that we have another interview with Matt Murphy coming to Missing later this week. Matt Murphy is an ABC News legal analyst and former senior deputy district attorney at the Orange County District Attorney's homicide unit. So we talk a lot about the crimes that he's covered. We talk a little bit about the Dirty John case, Karen Reed case, because he was a contributor on the ABC News documentary on that case. And yeah, he's a really great guy and a lot of fun to talk to, and so smart, whip smart about all this crime.
And impossibly handsome, might I say.
Yes.
Very articulate and just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all of the, I want to say, inside baseball type true crime information. The conversation that we have is amazing, and we cannot wait to have him back on the show. If people want to check out his book, The Book of Murder, if they want to read about that, if they want to order it, if they want to know more about Matt, go to thebookofmurder.com and check out everything that he's got going on there. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Matt Murphy and The Book of Murder.
Matt Murphy, how are you today?
Good. Back home in Manhattan Beach, and it is a scorcher. It's supposed to be like 100 degrees today, so forgive me if you hear my AC or my fan going.
No. You do what you have to do. I don't know if you're familiar with the type of background that I'm in right now. This is an attic. So once it gets over a certain temperature outside, it's like 30 degrees hotter in here. So that's why I have an AC in the window. So I totally relate. Put on the fan, the AC, whatever you need to do. You have been in our world for so long. We do this true crime thing. We podcast, and you're a staple of CrimeCon. But for those people out there who need to know who you are, can you fill in our listeners?
You bet. My name is Matt Murphy. I'm a retired now senior deputy district attorney from Orange County, California. I'm a California kid, grew up in LA, went to UCSB for undergrad, went to San Diego for law school. And then in 1992, I got a junior clerkship with the Orange County DA's office. End of the first day there, I was totally hooked, and I wound up spending 26 years. I tried 133 jury trials, about 250 cases to verdict. And for the last 21 years of my career, I was assigned to the sexual assault unit for 4 and then homicide for 17. So the way Orange County works is it's called a vertical system. So you basically, when you come into the homicide unit or sexual assault, you get assigned a certain part of the county. So Orange County has a population of about 3 million people. And when I was in homicide, I had the cities of Costa Mesa, Laguna Beach, Irvine, and Newport Beach. So any murders that happen in any one of those cities were automatically mine. And the idea is you get the prosecutor there that night working with the detectives, signing warrants and helping them. And then the detective follows the case all the way up. So at the end of trial and then sentencing, the detective is sitting next to you in the courtroom. So it's kind of cool. You get this very ground level experience with a lot of the detectives, and you build a relationship with them. And that's the way it works in Orange County. So I probably walked about 100 different murder scenes. After 17 years, I got an offer from ABC News to do some legal analysis and commentary for them. I took that opportunity. So I spent about half my time in New York City now, working for ABC, and then about half my time here in LA with my law practice.
I actually coincidentally saw you on TV this weekend when my wife and I watched an ABC News special on the Karen Reed case. And I really hadn't looked too deep into it before that. But I want to say thank you, because this was one of the very few times where my wife thinks I'm cool, because I told her we were going to interview you today.
Anything I can do to help.
But before we get to your book, can you tell us a little bit about that case? Is that case like bonkers, or what's the story like?
It's pretty bonkers. Basically, Karen Reed was she was dating this police officer in the Boston area. Apparently, kind of a stormy relationship, and they went out drinking. They were going to a friend's house, and it was sort of middle of winter type thing. And they, after drinking quite a bit, they drove to this friend's house. She dropped him off. She drove home. According to the prosecution, it looks like she hit him with her car. They charged her with a first-degree murder, which I think was a big mistake in this, and it turned out to be a big mistake. So because they'd had some acrimony in their relationship, the prosecution went in and basically argued that she meant to do it. Her defense lawyer is actually a friend of mine, very, very good lawyer named Alan Jackson, who's the real deal, and anybody who watched that trial, I mean, he throws heat, as they say, in trial. So he said, okay, well, if this is a first-degree murder, it probably was, but it wasn't my client who committed it. It was the people in the house. And then there were some investigative mistakes made by the police. In California, we call those Watson murders, where somebody's intoxicated and they accidentally kill somebody, or they do something where they, exercise a depraved heart or malignant mind, and they're so uncareful, if that's the right word, when they disregard the safety of others. It's known as an implied malice theory. A lot of people think that that's really what the case was, that she was intoxicated, that she hit him, that she should have known, or maybe she did know but thought he'd be okay, and then she drove home, because the next morning she started calling friends when he wasn't there, saying, where's the effect of I know I hit him with the car? So there was apparently some awareness there, and then she drove back with friends and he was dead in the snow. That's the case. So the prosecution said one thing that was kind of heavy, and the defense said something else that was, depending on who you listen to, crazy, and the truth may be somewhere in the middle on that. But there was some local podcaster or something named Turtle Boy who really got everybody whipped into a frenzy on that, and they started people that were inside the house, the defense was accusing of being the real killers. He released their addresses. And, if the defense is right, that's one thing. But if they're innocent, that's kind of awful. And this guy got held in criminal contempt and put in jail. And it's just, the case is a gigantic mess. And one of the fun things about doing commentary for me is that these are all problems I don't have to solve. I'm not one of the lawyers. And I don't know, I came in, I know what the public knows about that. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Alan, especially as a lawyer. And he was an LADA, but it's not my case, but it's nice to sort of Monday morning quarterback as opposed to being on the field taking all those hits.
Yeah, it is a wild story. And Tim was telling me about this morning. He said that he had watched you. I'll plan on watching that this evening. Every time I look at this, because this happened in our backyard. We're from Massachusetts. We're right outside of Boston. We had a studio in Worcester where Turtle Boy is notorious. He's no stranger to controversy. Tim was like, this thing just keeps getting wilder and wilder. And I feel the same way. Every time I set aside some time to look at this and do even a preliminary dig, I'm overwhelmed with all of the new stuff that just keeps piling on. It's everywhere. People have lawn signs out here. Free Karen Reed.
What the evidence shows on that is that I think best case scenario, she was heavily intoxicated. I don't think there's any dispute about that. She's on video drinking, and her blood alcohol, what they do is it's called extrapolation. And don't hold me to the numbers here, but I believe that this is around a little bit after midnight. And what forensic scientists are able to do is that they take your blood, they're able to calculate backwards based on your body weight and your drinking pattern, and they can figure out to a pretty high degree of certainty what somebody's blood alcohol level was when they were driving. And that happens in every DUI case practically in America. So this is a really solid science. And best case scenario for her, she was heavily intoxicated, and he was definitely hit by something, and the theory is it was her car. So the Free Karen Reed stuff, I don't understand that. It's best case scenario for her, the DA overcharged, and I think they did on this. We see these all the time where there's no actual intention to kill anybody, but it's still a murder, because if you hit somebody with a car in the snow and you drive away, and she was telling friends she thought she hit him the next day. There was two of them. There was two of these women, and they actually went back, and Karen Reed is the one that found him in the snow. So you can have an accident that results, and it's still a murder, And she had a very high blood alcohol level. I talked about this on another podcast once, and people were coming out of the woodwork throwing heat, going, blood, you don't know. And it's like, actually, you know what I do know? At least the science when it comes to DUIs, and I'm not taking a position on the case. And I think, in my view, the prosecution overcharged that. And Alan did absolutely everything that a good defense lawyer is going to do. He exploited every mistake they made. But the prosecution made mistakes. Best case scenario for Karen Reed is she was heavily intoxicated, I think hit this guy with her car. I don't know. Again, I don't have a dog in the fight. So for any of your listeners that have a strong opinion, not my case. Relax. But yeah, drinking and driving what is that? Is it South Park, right? Like Mr. Garrison says, is bad. Okay, that's bad. And sometimes people get killed. And based on my review of this, that's what I think happened, but I don't know. I haven't seen the files. I just know what the public knows. So, and by the way, anybody ignoring a court's order and organizing, releasing the home addresses of witnesses who may be completely innocent is a morally wrong thing to do, which is why that guy did time. That subverts the criminal justice system, that puts pressure on juries. That's not fair, and it's not fair to the jurors, and it's not fair to the victim's family. It's not fair to anybody. And I think it makes Karen Reed look worse. She didn't organize that. When you got mobs going after people because of a conspiracy theory advanced online, that's not good. But again, not my case. Not my case.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to get your take. I think that's very fair. Now, you wrote a book, and it seems like it's fantastic, and I want to get to that. But before we do, I got to ask, you were the host of the CrimeCon Clue Awards in 2023. And you may not know, but Lance and I were nominated in the Outstanding Episodic Series category for this show right now that we're on.
Okay. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we lost. So my question to you is, who rigged it, and was it you?
So they asked Kelly McClear. You guys must know Kelly, right? So yeah. Kelly's one of those people in my life. She's one of several women that I just do what she tells me to do. So she called me. She's like, "You're going to host the Clue Awards this year," and it's like, "Okay, Kelly, I'm in." Yeah, that was actually a lot of fun. Your podcast is outstanding. So hopefully you get another nomination.
I'm not hearing an answer to Tim's question though.
I don't know. Literally, I was a stuffed suit and a talking head, and I went out and they even wrote the whole thing on the teleprompter for me. The ending of that was all me. Basically, it was stand on the mark, say these words, smile, and try to, tell the joke in a way that actually is funny. And that was my role.
You did a great job. When Tim and I were sitting there, I remember thinking, I might have actually said it. I might have actually had many gin and tonics to calm my nerves. So I can't remember if I said this or just thought it, but watching you host, it was like, we got to get this guy on the show. Like, this guy is just like a resource of so many amazing, relevant things that we talk about.
I'm glad he did. This is I'm super happy to be on your podcast, because this is our first one, right? Hopefully first of many.
But this book is due out on the 17th of this month. Do you want to give folks a little rundown on what it covers?
Sure. So just a little in the kind of a funny story in the way of background. The first CrimeCon I did where I gave a presentation myself was in Vegas. I did a thing on no bodies, and Kelly got the audience review scores and called me at 2 a.m. And I went down, and she's like, "You got to come and meet me and Kevin." And I went down to the bar, and I got good scores. So she's like, the way you presented it, you should write a book. And of course, I've been thinking about it. Leaving the DA's office, you see such wild things, especially in a vertical capacity. And I miss it every day. So I thought, why not? I would tell some of these stories. And working in a homicide unit like that, especially when you're going there in the middle of the night, not so much about the details of the case, but I kept a journal regarding my thoughts, not anything technical, but just kind of what goes through your head when you're watching the autopsy of a 23-year-old woman who's been murdered, for financial gain. I thought it'd be interesting to go and share that with people. It's a memoir of my time in homicide. My first murder call out is the introduction, and just walking through a crime scene and what really goes through your head. And I thought people would be interested in that, and I hope they are. And then I walk the readers through some of the legal stuff. Like I explained that implied malice murder concept that we were just talking about, so people understand, like the people that are saying free Karen Reed, if they knew how implied malice murder worked, maybe they would take the sign out, of their lawn. So I walked the reader through a little bit at some of, like, what is a first degree murder? What is a second degree murder? And I explain it in the book the way I would explain it in front of a jury. And I use the same examples and, that I honed over 17 years of doing that work. And then I walk the readers through, I take them through about a dozen of my biggest cases that I did. I had the Golden State Killer was one of mine. I don't include him in the book. That's probably next book. But I did some famous cases, Skyler Deon, Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer. I had Dirty John Meehan. That was my case. I did the Ed Shin case. So I walked the readers through that. I had a guy from your neck of the woods, the Eric Naposki case. He was a New England Patriots outside linebacker who wound up blowing out a groin and then coming out here to California, and he started dating this horrific woman that essentially convinced him to commit a murder for her, and he did. It was like the plot to Body Heat. Those are all the different chapters in the books. And I talk about different kinds of murders, like gang murders are a very, very different thing than like a child abuse murder, which is a very different thing than a Watson murder, which we were just talking about, which is different than, plots to murder people for money, the conspiracies, and those are fascinating. And then I volunteered to be one of the 2 cold case deputies in Orange County, and I did that for about 10 years, where I'd go in with these awesome detectives and dust off these old files and see if we could file charges. And we did on a bunch of cases where we were able to reach back in time. Either we'd find something to test and submit it for DNA testing and hit a home run, or sometimes just a new set of eyes. We were able to take runs at people that had gotten away with murder. I have a bunch of those in the book, and I hope people enjoy it. I really do.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Great. Can you tell us about the Dirty John Meehan case and what you did on that one? Obviously, this one's very familiar to, I'm sure, most of our audience.
For your listeners who don't know, he was like everything that could possibly go wrong with online dating. He was a really scary dude. And essentially what he would do is he would meet women online and charm them. And he would put himself out there as an anesthesiologist, right? And he said he worked with Doctors Without Borders. What he was actually, he was a nurse anesthetist, which is a hugely respected and very specialized area of medicine. But he wasn't an MD. And he basically lost his license because he kept stealing the drugs from his patients, which is frowned upon. He wound up going to prison and it's the wildest story. Like, he ran from the cops and fell down an elevator shaft. And when he was released, he figured out that it was a lot easier, rather than get sober and get his license back, to just swindle these older, sort of lonely women with money. And he went after one, after another, after another. And he finally wound up in Orange County, where he was dating a woman who, her name was Deborah Newell, who had 2 beautiful daughters that were typical Newport Beach kind of beach kids. And he did the whole deal where he charmed her and they got married. And like, yeah, okay, I wasn't a doctor. Maybe I accidentally misled you on that. I'm a nurse, but I'm not doing it. Like, blah, blah, blah. And what would happen over and over again is when these women would finally figure out who this guy was, he would then stalk them and sue them and, threaten them. So he went into full stalker mode with Deborah Newell, wound up. I almost don't want to spoil the story for those who haven't seen it, but so many people have. But he attempted to murder her daughter, Tara. So Tara was out walking her Australian Shepherd, Cash, and she had she lived in an apartment in Newport, and she comes back with her dog. Next thing she knows, there's this big, giant, athletic, 240-pound dude with a knife stabbing her, trying to pull her into a van, basically. And inside the van, there were handcuffs and a loaded firearm and duct tape, and basically it was a murder kit. He was trying to kill her. Cash, the dog, bit him in the leg. Somehow she manages, it went to ground, so they're rolling around on the ground. She kicks the knife out of his hand, and she was an avid Walking Dead fan. So what do you do when you have a monster? We all know from Walking Dead, you stab him in the eye, right? So she picked up the knife and stabbed him in the eye, killing him. It's a homicide in Newport Beach, so this winds up on my desk. And I'm reading this just going, I cannot believe that this is real. And of course, we got to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and it's very important. It's a homicide, so we've got to make sure. And oftentimes, if there's one thing I learned doing all those murder scenes is that oftentimes it is not what it initially appears to be. So we had to, my guys had to investigate, and the Newport detectives are first rate. Newport PD is just a fantastic police department. And, we methodically went through that. And at the end, it was incredibly exactly what it appeared to be. And Tara Newell is a freaking hero. And we got to be friends over the years. I love Tara. But I had the great honor of clearing her of all criminal responsibility for that. And then, so when we're done, I'm like, this is way too good a story not to share. So I called my buddy Chris Godford with the LA Times, and I'm like, dude, let's grab lunch. You gotta take a look at this. And even then, I thought he'd write an article about it, and he turned it into Dirty John, which is amazing. It is, for those of you I think there's like 30 million downloads of the podcast at this point. So that's one of the chapters in the book. But then I go into the editor, who I love. The guy, his name is Adam Wilson. He's with Hyperion, and this guy's fantastic, and he's brilliant. And he kicked back the idea. He's like, hey, why don't based on all the online dating gone wrong experience you have in the DA's office and in sexual assault and in homicide, how about you do like a top 10 list of things to avoid? So I have some online dating tips that I threw in there just as kind of an aside, things that women can look out for. I wrote it for, people who are dating men, but I think that the same would apply to people that are dating women too. That's one of the chapters in the book, and it was fascinating to write.
Amazing. Yeah, that story is absolutely one of those stories that is always in the true crime, universe. Like it's almost become lore at this point. So really interesting to get the inside take on it, get like the behind the scenes on something that's so public and so revered in this world. What's a couple of those tips that you put in your book? I don't want to give away too much because people need to get this book, but just a couple.
Sure. Well, one of them is, if you're dating a guy who has a problem with the time you're spending with your family, that's a huge, gigantic red flag. And I'm approaching it not just like, you can find that on any dating site, tips, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of cases that have gone really wrong, where somebody's actually been murdered. And that's one of the things you see over and over again is it starts out, they're very charming. And then it moves into, well, why are you spending so much time with your family? Or, your sister was mean to me at that. So it starts out as very subtle resistance, and it builds. And then it turns into a guy who has problems with the guys that you're with at work, or maybe an ex-husband that you have a good relationship with. And that, like, for the vast majority, that just winds up being a bad relationship because you're with a guy who's insecure. But that really is the gateway to the guys that then they'll grab your wrist at a party. They'll push you down in the house, and it gets increasingly physical. And that's the cycle of domestic violence. And then they're regretful, and they're charming, and they're so apologetic, and it'll never happen again until it does. And that's the cycle of domestic violence that we see. And those are exactly the type of guys that wind up killing their wives or their girlfriends. Any guy who borrows money from you or asks to borrow money, I don't care if it's your first date or your 20th, any dude who asks for money, it's only a matter of time before that guy's going to be living with you and on your paycheck. If there's a guy who seems to have a weird problem about showing you where he lives, means he probably either lives with his parents or maybe an ex-wife, or he is really dirt poor and the nice car he's driving is a rental. So there's a few just real common sense tips, but things that I've seen prosecuting domestic violence cases, and especially domestic violence murders. And it is a theme. I mean, in the modern, like post-COVID, we're all about the same age. I think I might be a little older than you guys. When we were in college or when we were younger, you'd meet people at parties and at weddings, and and that's still happening. But post-COVID, man, there's so many people that meet online now. I've done the online dating thing for about a minute myself. I throw in some tips that I thought, might help people in the modern day.
And speaking of dating, so this Rodney Alcala from
Yes,
the dating
thank you.
game. Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about this guy and your work on this case?
So Rodney Alcala is, or was, one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He's also known as the dating game killer. He was active in the 60s and 70s in LA, but really all around California and all around New York as well as places in between. And essentially, he was raised in East LA, and he is your classic American serial killer. He, contrary to popular belief, a lot of serial killers aren't abused as children, and there's people that have a hard time wrapping their head around that. The truth is, as uncomfortable as it may be, a lot of them are spoiled as kids. I know Jeffrey Dahmer's relationship with his father was complex, but I'll tell you, at least he had a father in the picture, and Rodney was raised with a mother who loved him. He had two siblings that were, his brother went to West Point and came back a war hero from Vietnam. Anyway, he kidnaps an 8-year-old girl in 1968 named Tally Shapiro as she's walking home in Hollywood. And there was a Good Samaritan who saw it. The police officer, and this is obviously way before cell phones. This Good Samaritan sees it, finds a payphone, calls it in. A police officer, LAPD officer Camacho, shows up, and this guy was a stud. He had been shot in Vietnam, and then he was shot in the Watts riots. So this guy had been wounded twice. This is his first day back at work, and he gets a call from, hey, something didn't look right. This little girl went in his house. So he knocks on the door, decides he's going to kick it in. And basically, Rodney Alcala goes running out the back naked, and he's faced with this chase the bad guy or save the little girl, and he looks down, and in a puddle of blood, there's this little 8-year-old who's been beaten, raped, and she has a barbell over her neck. So she's in a coma, and he chose the right thing. He saved the girl. She's in a coma for 32 days. She'd been brutally raped, and Alcala, naked, somehow got away and went to New York, changed his name to John Berger, and they eventually tracked him down working at an all-girls summer camp in Vermont. And so this is back in early 70s, back when we had this whole thing with like this revolving door of justice where, hey, we'll give him the help that he needs, right? Air quotes on that. And he got a little therapy. And so he gets extradited. They give him a life sentence. He had his parole hearing, and the California Board of Prison Terms released that man after 34 months in state prison. And after his release, he went on to murder about 100 people. So there is a real cautionary tale, especially here in California, as we shift back to early release and therapy. And look, I really am. I'm all for rehabilitation for those who can be rehabilitated or who want to straighten out their lives. Like, I'm all for it. But there are certain types of people where there is no fixing them, and sexual predators is one of those. And I'm scared with the way California is going. So Rodney Alcala, among his many, many victims after his release in 1974, he eventually murdered a 12-year-old girl named Robin Samso in Huntington Beach. There was another hero in this, a guy named Craig Robeson, who's now a Superior Court judge. He was a 28-year-old detective. It was his first homicide, and he figured this thing out, and he arrested Rodney Alcala, and he comes down, and they wind up getting into a storage locker that he had up in Seattle. And they found a receipt, and this is just awesome heads-up police work. Like, they go in, and they're looking for instrumentalities of a kidnapping, but warrants prohibit you from taking stuff that's beyond that. They see a receipt for a storage locker in Seattle, so they can't take it, but because it's in plain sight, they're able to write down the information, so they know where it is, they have the address. When they arrest Rodney, his sister comes in, and on a recorded line, he says, hey, you got to go clear out my storage locker. So at that point, we call that a clue, right? So they get up there and they get into the storage locker, and they find, among other things, they find a pair of gold ball earrings that belong to Robin Samso. So that's huge. They find a pouch with all of these items of jewelry, and a lot of serial killers take trophies. It's almost like they go to school for it. And it's fascinating. They collect little keepsakes, and Rodney Alcala was into earrings, and we find these bags filled with earrings and women's clothing that we only got a DNA hit on one of them to one of the other victims. And we have no idea to this day who the other ones belong to, but each one of them represents an unsolved homicide. In addition to that, they also found thousands and thousands of photographs because he actually graduated from UCLA Film School and he was a professional photographer. Thousands and thousands of young women, young boys in positions of vulnerability, like in the forest or on deserted beaches with him or in the desert, photo after photo after photo. And we identified some of them. Some of them came back to known homicide victims, dozens and dozens and dozens of others that we have no idea who they are or who they were. And while he was out, he was also given permission by his parole officer to drive back and forth across the United States. And he committed at least one murder we know of in Wyoming that was solved by those photographs. So fascinating case and a cautionary tale. And basically it kept getting reversed. He gets convicted in 1979, sentenced to death. The Rosebud Supreme Court in California that never upheld a single death penalty case reverses it. So the family had to go through it again, tried again by a guy named Tom Goethals in Orange County, he now sits on the Court of Appeal, ironically. Phenomenal prosecutor, really smart guy. It gets reversed a second time, this time by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, comes back and it winds up on my desk. And no sooner is the ink dry on what's called the return of remittitor, which is the order saying release this man or retry him, that we started getting DNA hits in Los Angeles County. So I teamed up with a woman named Gina Satriano, who worked for the LADA's office at the time. And we wound up prosecuting these 5 cases in Orange County that were DNA hits. And one of the terrifying things about Alcala is, a lot of serial killers target sex workers, prostitutes, nature of the business. It's anonymous. They put themselves in positions of vulnerability in dark alleys and whatever. Alcala was targeting women who weren't doing that. One of the victims, Georgia Wickstead in Malibu, was a pediatric cancer nurse, computer programmers, legal secretaries. His victims were the same women that we know and love in our personal lives. So they were beloved by their families. So all these years later, when we tried that case, we had a courtroom full of these people, and your job as a prosecutor is to try to bring that home for the families, which we did.
Wow, that's incredible. So, yeah, so he's got over 100 possible murders, even though is 8 confirmed? Is that correct?
No, we got a lot more than 8. So, yes, these are estimates. He went to Texas, he went to Europe, he drove across the country twice. He was convicted of a series that he committed in New York City when he was out there as John Berger. I think they charged him with 2 or 3, but we know of at least 5 or 6 out there that I frankly would have charged. 6 for sure. And I think the local agencies cleared those murders officially to Alcala, even though he wasn't charged. There's the one in Wyoming that he was charged for. There was another one cleared to him in Marin that he definitely did. He's a suspect of 2 more in San Diego. We had our Orange County one, and then there were 4 in Los Angeles County. I just got a message yesterday on Instagram from somebody who said that Rodney Alcala tried to get her in his car. So this guy was super prolific. And so Robeson estimated 100, given the frequency that he was striking. And in the middle of all that, in 1977, he goes on the dating game and won it. It is something to watch. It's on YouTube. And in fact, Anna Kendrick is coming out with a movie any day now on Netflix called Woman of the Hour. And so she actually brought me in. I got to consult with Anna Kendrick, which was super fun. She's smart as can be, nice as could be. And I just I sort of made a new friend, as a consultant on that, helping her tell that story.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial. And just a reminder, folks, that we will return at the end of this conversation with some final thoughts.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
What is the argument for releasing or retrying somebody like this? He's already been convicted of this attempted murder of this child in such a grotesque, brutal way. What did the powers that be say to present this argument?
So I got to be careful how I answer this because we're talking about the appellate level. As a licensed attorney, I have the greatest respect, of course, for the appellate process, especially the California Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. However, the death penalty, even though there's a moratorium in the state of California, we of course want to be very careful that nobody gets executed who's innocent, right? So you have the highest level of appellate scrutiny, as we should have. Okay, so Rose Bird, she was the presiding justice of the California Supreme Court. She was a Jerry Brown's appointee from his first term back in the 70s. And she would brag about how she never upheld a single death penalty case. The best judges put all of their own personal politics aside when they make judicial rulings, and it has to work that way. And when it doesn't, the system breaks down. With Alcala, they reversed it the first time because evidence from the New York murders was admitted against him. They said that other crimes of sexual violence were too prejudicial. Well, since then, we've had the California legislature has passed a thing called 1108 evidence, which says exactly that you can put in other crimes of sexual violence, provided that they're not so over the top different than the one you're prosecuting. That has withheld all appellate scrutiny. So I think that legally that was a bad call, but it becomes what's known as law of the case. So when it came back for Tom Goethals, the second prosecutor on it, he couldn't introduce any of that evidence. So he had to go on other things. They reversed it the second time, the Ninth Circuit, saying that his lawyer should have put on an alibi defense. It's frustrating because the family has to go through that again, the victim's family, and it destroyed this family. It really did. And we want to give maximum deference to the judicial process, and we want to be careful. And of course, we want to make sure we do not execute the wrong guy. But I'll tell you what, when we tested the DNA in that bag, we came back with DNA to a woman named Charlotte Lamb, who was one of the victims in LA. It was absolutely conclusively true that Rodney Alcala committed these crimes. And in fact, he didn't even oppose those. So it's, when the family has to go through that again, your question is a very good one. The answer is we want to be as careful as we can be, but it's also equally important that that ideology or politics don't impact a judicial ruling. That would be every bit as bad as, in my view, a judge who is pro-death receiving a case that has clear error where the guy really might not have done it, but because of their personal beliefs on the death penalty, they affirm the conviction. Like, we don't want that either, And look, I believe that if it's ever a close call, we shouldn't be executing people if there's any doubt, But I sat on the committee in Orange County for 15 years that decided which cases we sought death on and which we didn't. So in California, it's known as a special circumstance murder. So it's like murder committed during a kidnapping or a robbery or a rape. It has to be a really bad murder. And of the ones that qualify, we sought death in less than 4% of the cases that qualified. And essentially, it was two criteria for us. There had to be no real doubt, like no doubt that the guy actually did it. And it needed to be truly shocking to a group of experienced homicide prosecutors. Those were the two criteria. So it's like murdering children that you rape, lining up people in a robbery and killing 5 people against a wall so you can effectuate a robbery. Like, it's truly the most shocking, the most brutal, the most unnecessary. Those are the ones that we would seek death on. And the primary caveat being there's no real doubt. Everybody can come up with some imaginary doubt, but there's no actual doubt the guy did it. And, those are the criteria. So it's a bit of a hornet's nest in California. I don't think we'll ever see another execution. And look, that's fine. If the law is it's life without possibility of parole, so be it. But there's a bill right now in California to eliminate that, to make it so that it is a 25-year maximum, killing up to 2 people, which I think is madness.
If you've got any more time, we'd love to ask you about the Skyler Deon case.
So that was the Tom and Jackie Hawks murder out of Newport. That's one of the chapters in the book. And essentially, it was these a very nice couple who retired, and their dream was literally to kind of sail off into the sunset. They wound up wanting to sell their yacht. It was called the Well Deserved, and they found a buyer who was a former child actor, and they went out to sea to do what's called a sea trial, which is basically a test drive, and they never came back. And Skyler came back with his wife with all these documents indicating that he had purchased the boat. They had a notary public that notarized all these documents. She was interviewed and said, I watched the transaction. She had no criminal history at all. We did 2 forensic workups on the boat. We had nothing. There was no blood. There was nothing to indicate there was any sort of a struggle. It was just all very weird. That's how that case started, and it turned out to be just a wild, wild investigation.
Is there one that it's like your white whale of a case that you want to dig in on? Is there one that...
Yeah, so I had a few. That was certainly one of them. De Leon that was a big part of my life for a long time. Again, I worked with wonderful detectives, and that's one of the fascinating things about being a vertical prosecutor is you get in there with these cops, and you're in the meeting room, and you're trying to help them solve a case like that. Being in the unit, it's so time consuming that it impacts, your relationships and your personal life. That was one where my personal life wound up actually helping the investigation because, this is in the book. I don't know if I want to, I'll tell you guys the story if you want to hear it, or if you think I'm putting out too much. So anyway, this is, I almost got married, right? So I was with somebody for 5 years and we broke up and I thought we were going to get back together. And she wound up, meeting another guy who's her husband to this day. And he's awesome. And a friend of mine that knew us both in college, came to me and he's like, well, dude, look at the bright side. He's a little like you, just better in every way. This is one of my best friends, who's in my fantasy league, as a matter of fact. But so I'm Mr. Single Guy, and I'm devastated. And I wind up meeting a person who is just not a good fit for me at all. I stumble into this thing, a heartbroken fool. Fast forwarding about 9 months, she takes me to this wedding in Napa. And it's her friends and all that. And she used to date one of the groomsmen in this wedding when they were in college. And everybody at the wedding, I don't know anybody. And, one thing leads to another. And she gets mad at me about something stupid. And we've been dating for, not quite a year. But this was my girlfriend at this point. And it was, it was not a healthy relationship. But anyway, I catch her making out with the groomsmen at like 2 a.m. And that's a problem. So
wait, the woman you were dating?
The woman who my girlfriend who took me to the wedding, who used to date one of the groomsmen, was making out with that groomsman at 2 a.m. So it's like,
oh my God.
I'd never experienced anything like that before. So I take an annual surf trip with a bunch of my buddies. I was new to homicide, and I had this stupid wedding that I promised her I'd go to. So I was going to take a pass that year, and it's a big trip. We go to Indonesia, and we charter a surf charter, and we go and surf these remote places. And I've surfed since I was a kid, and that was the one year I was going to skip it. And we were supposed to be in Napa for like 3 days, and it was supposed to be this romantic getaway. Less romantic when you catch your girlfriend making out with another guy, unless some people, I guess, are into that. I'm not. So anyway, I cut my trip short. So I'm driving back to the Oakland airport, and I call my buddy Sean, and I'm like, please tell me that spot is still available. And 3 days later, I'm on a plane to Indonesia. Our captain that year was a man named Gary Burns. He wound up being a kind of a lifelong friend of mine. I love the guy, but he had lived on boats his entire life. And, you're on the boat for about 12 days and you're surfing all day. And at night, what happens is everybody eats and drinks. Gary, after a few beers, he started talking about some of the characters he'd met along the years and along his travels, including some smugglers and some sketchy guys that are like on the underside of the boating world. There's like the yachting world, and then there's like the boating world. Anyway, about 2 months into the Hawks investigation, we had an absolute dead end. I only met Gary because I went on the trip, and I only went on the trip because of my girlfriend making out with another guy. She was no longer my girlfriend at that point, obviously. We had a dead end. We had a weird story from Skyler. We had these forms. We had the same story from the notary. We had nothing. I called Gary in Australia, and I'm like, if a murder happened on a boat, what are we missing? Without skipping a beat, he said, if they're selling their boat, there will be a manifest. Count the anchors, because if you had a murder on a boat, you will have a missing anchor. It had been staring us in the face the entire freaking time. There was one of the bow anchors was missing, and none of us noticed it. We had 2 different forensic teams, and they're the best at what they do as far as collecting DNA and fingerprints and all that. They're not taught on like what does a killer think of as far as getting rid of a body off a boat. The whole house of cards came tumbling down after that. With that, we had enough. I charged Skyler. Everybody else either fled or started talking, and we wound up getting everybody together on that. And that's a big chapter in the book. I walk everybody through that investigation, that case, and I mean it was absolutely wild. That case was unbelievable. And I mean, you go through that with some of these cops, you wind up making a lot of lifelong friends, and you have that experience. And it was that. So that's one that was a big one. But I had a bunch. McLaughlin was another one. That was the one with Eric Naposki, where I just liked the family so much, and they were so nice, and the people who murdered their dad got away with it. And 15 years had gone by. And working with that family, the McLaughlins, Kim and Jenny, your heart goes out for them. And that really is, at the end of the day, that's what this job was about. It was about trying to bring justice to these victims' families. And it becomes kind of a weird addiction after a while. And like I said before, I still miss it every day. And so this book was sort of a way for me an old judge, a friend of mine who used to supervise me in sexual assault, Emery King, he called the book my methadone, because he's like, you're such a heroin addict with these cases for so long. The book is like your temporary fix. So I hope these stories will be educational, and I hope I hope they like it. I share a lot of personal thoughts in this, so I'm gonna be devastated if they don't. We're doing okay on Goodreads so far, so hopefully people like it.
Yeah, the reviews are great. So congratulations on the book, and really looking forward to seeing the reaction from the public once it's finally released. And you mentioned a possible second book. Is that in your plans?
Yeah. So yeah, we're working on it. As in fact, I've got 2 hours after we're done before my next appointment, and I'm trying to organize our next proposal. The next one's going to be. I thought it was so fascinating getting back into the serial killers when I wrote about Rodney Alcala, and I did 13 of them when I was in the unit. So I thought that's probably worth a book by itself, So it's essentially, we're looking at some of the history that I learned along the way prosecuting them, which I think is fascinating. Like era of Jack the Ripper, into some of the cases that I did. There's a case in Orange County that I really want to write about that is shocking, that there's been almost no media on it at all. There's a guy named Randy Kraft. And so I want to write about that. I want to talk about some of my more high profile ones, and then get into like Gilgo Beach and Rex Heuermann, and talk about where I think the future of serial killing is going with forensics. And, that show Dexter is, I think in the Heuermann case, I think we're going to learn along the way that Dexter is kind of real. Like the guys that are, that's the next wave of serial murder, are people that are doing it with a mind towards the forensic science advancements, which I think is fascinating. So yeah, so book number 2, that's what we're putting together now. And if people buy the first one, hopefully Disney Books will not be sick of me, and they'll let me do a second one. So that's the plan.
Well, we've gone over a lot, and this conversation is pushing into an hour. I can't imagine how long the conversation is going to be when you're ready to come back on to talk about your serial killer book, because you just truncated it in like 3 minutes, and I already want to ask about 15 questions, which we can't. But when that book is ready, when you're ready to talk about it, please come back on. It's going to be an amazing conversation.
Oh, guys, I love your podcast anyway. So anytime at all. It doesn't even have to be the next book. You want to talk Koberger, any case of the day, I'm reading up and all that for my job with ABC. I just love your podcast, so it would be a pleasure to come on anytime.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Okay, welcome back here for Final Thoughts. Great interview with Matt Murphy. He's so professional and speaks so clearly. I really love having him as a guest, and so much of what he said in this conversation was just very informative stuff for us and our audience.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't get over the fact that he still didn't give you a clear answer about whether or not the CrimeCon award ceremony, whether we were actually the victim of some voter fraud, if you will, at the Clue Awards a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, he's a former prosecutor, and he should know better than anyone that not denying it means you could be at fault here.
Basically an admission of guilt. So we're going to keep pressing him. We're going to have him back on. We have a new episode with him. We're going to slow play this until he slips up. We're going to get him.
We are. And so much of that conversation was great, especially the stuff on Rodney Alcala, the serial killer Rodney Alcala that Matt Murphy worked on prosecuting him. And what incredible information. First of all, about how many victims this guy may have out there. Matt said over 100, and there are people online who think it's closer to 200, and that's pretty shocking. But he's so matter-of-factly new. He was like, no, it's not only the few that are confirmed. There's definitely more. Like he knew that wasn't even in question. It just was a matter of it never made it to legal proceedings.
I think one of the conversation goals that I'd like to have with Matt about this later on when we speak to him again, because we will, is why not a lot of people knew about Alcala. And I think some people just kind of knew like the dating show Killer, but I wasn't super familiar with Rodney Alcala until maybe a year ago or so, and then Anna Kendrick has that movie out now, Woman of the Hour, which I'm sorry, I'm a bad true crime content producer. I am waiting for a good night to watch that, and I just haven't had a good night to watch it. You watched it. You said that it was excellent.
Yeah, it's very good.
But I'm just curious, like this conversation path that I'd like to go down with him or somebody at some point is, why is Ted Bundy listed? Like, why is that at the front of people's memories and not this guy who's more prolific and seemingly more effective at being a serial killer? It's like the perception is something that kind of fascinates me.
Yeah, good call. I don't know.
I want answers.
Maybe the Alcala case was more of a slow drip, and less of like, they arrested a serial killer and then he escaped. But in Alcala's case, as Matt describes, he was arrested and then released and then went on to commit, another 100 homicides. So yeah, definitely sort of flew under the radar, I think, for a lot of his life, and even managed to get a lot of people to take pictures with him and things like that, which is just a chilling thought in the crimes of Alcala, because there's a lot of those photographs that have not been identified. And, I don't know. I mean, how many missing people out there are really attributed to this guy?
I know. It's crazy. Maybe we will get more information on this when Matt Murphy releases his next book.
I hope so.
So that would be interesting to read. I really look forward to whatever book he's going to come up with next, because just like his career as a prosecutor, his writing is so on point and effective, and he not only rises to the occasion, but he just like knocks it out of the park.
He really does. So, make sure to check out The Book of Murder. It is available at your local bookseller, and it's a winner. It's a winner of a book. I love the Audible version. Matt reads it, narrates it, and does a great job as well. So, definitely check that out.
He doesn't fall into the trap of the author just needs to read it because they want control over the story. He's a good narrator. So, don't let that deter you if you see his name as the narrator. He, again, just blows it away. I think one thing about the book that is appealing to me is he does get a little personal in there. So I think the sprinklings of personal life and challenges and obstacles and just these moments that go into him painting a full picture of himself and how that lent itself to his career. Because as much as someone in his position probably wanted to do this, he doesn't really separate the personal life does help him with his professional life and vice versa.
All right, so thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We really appreciate it. Follow us on social media at Missing CSM.